Hi, everyone. Elliot Began with TIG, and this is TIG Talks, the podcast taped in front of a live virtual audience, which is you. And we feature your questions raw and unfiltered. And before I start and introduce a man who needs no introduction, which I think is now a cable show or streaming show by David Letterman, just a bit of housekeeping. This is about your questions, and you can enter them and get them to me in numerous ways, but the easiest of them is to just use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and throw them in there, and we'll do our best to address all of them. Before I turn it over to John, though, we're doing something a little bit different here. This is not your typical conversation about, founder best practice, entrepreneurship, leadership lessons, all of those things. And, if those come up, cool, that's fine. But John's used his platform of late to speak, as I would say, truth to power and talk about what's going on in our, in our society, both politically and civilly. And I reached out to him and said, I think it would be great to have this conversation with all of the founders participating, because you all have a platform. As founders, you have the opportunity to decide to be change agents beyond just your product and what you're trying to do in market. And that's really where I want to see us take this conversation and take this talk. But whatever questions you put up, we'll do our best to address. And if you disagree with me and think that I'm full of shit and this isn't the direction you want to go, all right, we'll go whatever way you take it. So without further ado, John, why don't you introduce yourself to maybe the one person in this industry who does not?
I don't know about that. I'm John Foraker. I've been in the industry since '94, basically. And most people know me as a person who was at Annie's forever. And I got together with a few other people at a company called Once Upon a Farm, where I've been for the last 3 years. And I did 3 years at General Mills too, after I sold Annie's to them, on the U.S. leadership team there, which was a fun experience. Learned a lot. And that's me.
So I'm just going to jump right in. And when did it kind of click for you? When did you finally say, I'm tired of not saying something? I need to have my voice heard. The stuff that's going on in this country is absolutely crazy, and it needs to change, and I need to be a part of that change. When did you finally hit that kind of breaking point where you outed it and it became part of your normal conversation?
Well, I've believed for years that that leaders needed to be authentic and lead with their real values, and lead their companies that they're driving with their real values. And we started doing a lot of that stuff. Maybe in the last 10 years I was at Annie's. Things like, we were one of the very first brands that that celebrated Pride Day in social media with all of our boxes lined up in a rainbow color. And that was way before anyone was doing stuff like that. And we took all kinds of shit for it. And I didn't give a crap, honestly, because I knew that, first of all, I had a lot of friends in that community. And so, but secondly, I knew that our brand stood for inclusion, and I could care less if there were people that didn't like it. And so I've operated that way for a long time. Like this last 3 years, it's gotten a lot more personal. The time that I really just said, I'm losing my mind and I have to speak up, was when we were having the most obvious rounds of child separation at the border. And I just was sitting there one day and just going, like, what the hell is happening? We're a brand that speaks to kids and parents, and 80% or more of our consumption is kids age 1 through 4. I know, without even having to ask our consumers, that the vast majority of the moms that buy our products are appalled by that. And I looked around in the landscape of where CEOs talk, and there was just nobody saying anything about it. And so I wrote an article called "Where Are All the CEOs?" Posted it, and it got a lot of traction, both positive and negative. And I just feel like now's a time where we just have to stand up. And, you know, most recently I posted on LinkedIn something to the effect of like, I've hired hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I've made lots of hiring mistakes, but I've never hired anybody as grossly incompetent and as dishonest as the person we have running the country right now. And all you CEOs out there, I know for a fact you try to hire the right kind of people too, high integrity, honest, hardworking. And if any of us had somebody like that we hired, they'd be fired in a half an hour, if not by the end of the week. And so I just feel like it's from a very personal standpoint, I think we need to stand up for the values that we believe in. And people say that's political. Honestly, I'm not sure I see it that way. I see it standing up for values. And if people think your values are political, then so what? Like, but I'm not going to ever say it's okay. I could care less what letters behind somebody's name. If you have somebody that's in a place of public trust and they're grossly incompetent, they should be called grossly incompetent, and we should be honest about it. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I think hopefully others will feel confident in their ability to do that as well.
So a couple things that come to mind, and I do think the most important point well, I shouldn't say most, but an important point you just made is it's not necessarily political. It's values based. It's values based to you as a person and to you know, Once Upon a Farm. It's what you do, right, and it's how you behave, and speaking up for that is not, you know, is not disingenuous. It is the epitome of authenticity. But it's scary as hell because there is blowback, right? And you know, you have the benefit of being around a little bit, and you can put up your middle finger and tell people to, you know, do what they need to do when they blow back. But there's a lot of founders on this call that, you know, haven't you know, necessarily earned that place in the industry yet. A couple of quick questions before I turn it over to the group. And one is, when you decided to begin to speak out, did you talk to your fellow co-founders? Did you speak to your investors, or did you just let it rip?
I don't know that I had an overt conversation with them, like asking permission to say that I wanted to do this, but they all know me, and I have a track record of saying what's on my mind and really being apolitical. I don't feel like I'm a political person. I feel like I'm a very values-driven person, to the point you made, and they know I have strong values and I'm going to talk about them. And so no, they didn't. And I just want to drive positive change and have an impact, not just at the company that I'm running now, but hopefully more broadly. And I think this industry is one of the most amazing industries, I think. I mean, obviously biased, but in the world. And it's because there are so many people that are drawn to this industry because of values and the fact that they want to make life better for people around them and the planet and the environment. And so if there ever was an industry that should be speaking up, it's ours. Like, right. And so I hope that more people will.
What's been the biggest surprise since you started doing that? Since you, I mean, I shouldn't say started, because you always, to your point, you always have been. I've been around you enough. I've seen you speak to audiences before where you've let a rip. You know, you've never held punches, but this has been, at least in my perception, your most overt or most strongly worded, you know, set of advocacy or set of, you know, of opinion. What's been the biggest surprise, you know, of late in terms of blowback or feedback, both, you know, maybe positive or negative?
Yeah, I think I would say it's probably been that most people respect the place I'm coming from. There's obviously flamethrowers and people that block you on LinkedIn or whatever. Who cares? Like, there's always haters. I've always believed that, and I don't pay attention to them. But when you are able to talk about issues like that are fundamentally values driven, like let's spend a second on food insecurity here in the U.S. Okay, We had bad food security, insecurity problems before COVID. They're dramatically worse now, and they're going to get way worse over the next 2 months. Okay. And the only thing holding the country together from a food security standpoint, as bad as it is SNAP, the SNAP program. SNAP program is under political attack constantly by people that are trying to take it away, make it harder to qualify for, make it so complicated that people can't figure it out. Like, I don't know how anyone who, anyone who like thinks of family and the neighbor down the street, what happens to them when they lose their job, and taking confidence in knowing that they can actually keep their kids fed. Like, I don't know how anybody could be against that program. And so in this environment, I feel like we have to speak up, because the people that are for ripping those programs apart and dismantling them, they're very vocal. And so when I've explained things like that to people who are questioning me or whatever, and they know that I'm not coming at it from a political perspective, I'm coming at it from just a core set of values about what it is to be a human in the world, they respect it mostly. And I would also say, for every one person that loses their mind, there's probably 5 to 10 who say, you know what, I get where you're coming from, and I support that. So I'd say it's much more positive than negative, is what I would say.
Well, one of the most disheartening things to me is that we used to be a country that could actually disagree with each other and have civil discourse and sit around at the table and talk about what we believed and how those beliefs may be different from the other person sitting next to us. We've come to this place now that just scares the shit out of me, that we've just othered people, right? So it's either you're with us or you're an other. And we just so fiercely self-identify with those things that we take any disagreement, any dialogue around things, be it political or be it even values-based, as an affront to our self-identity. We've become a nation so fixated by that. I have 3 grown kids, and one of the things that we really try to instill in them is this belief that you should have a strong opinion. That's great. Build an opinion, have a strong opinion, but just hold it loosely, because you're going to find out that a fair number of your opinions are just fucking wrong. And you got to be okay with that. You got to be able to accept the fact that you're wrong. So a question here in that is, if you were to give advice to early stage founders who are still in the hunt for, capital and doing all of those kind of things, but really have something to say and want to say, what would that advice be?
It would be, well, it depends a little bit. If it's them wanting to speak on behalf of the brand and business they're creating, which could be separate and apart a little bit from their own personal opinion and view and how they do it. But I would just say, think through the points that you want to make and the values that those represent and the venues in which you do it, and try to, I always try to come off, even when I'm really angry, I try to come off at least as professional. Sometimes I probably don't. I'll drop an expletive or something in my writing, but try to come off as professional and reasonable. And you'll find that the vast majority of the time, people will respect that, even if they disagree with it. It's particularly in the capital area or the customer area of the industry. People know that people have strong opinions, and if you're speaking from the heart and about things that you really do care about, and especially that are linked to the core of what you're trying to do in your business, they're going to respect that. And just be prepared for the 1 out of 10 that won't, and that's the cost of speaking up in a free society. There shouldn't be a cost, but there is. And but you have the right to do it.
Yeah. And you should actually invite that in. Again, those are people that you can dialogue with and invite in and take the high road. And I think, I'll just add a couple of points to that. First of all, I think, I'm a big proponent of the word empathy and the use of empathy. And I think as you reach out and as you find your voice, finding it from a place of empathy and really understanding, who's going to be receiving this and how it's going to be received. And I'm not suggesting you placate, and I'm not suggesting you necessarily tone down your message. I just encourage you to understand how it's going to be perceived and received and reacted to through the eyes of those getting it, and be, just kind of be ready for it and be prepared for it, and then adjust accordingly from there. And from a business standpoint, just plain and simple hardcore capitalism, the best marketing tends to be polarizing. You're not going to satisfy everybody. And if you're really speaking truth, if you're really standing for your brand values and how you want your brand to show up in the world, and you're being authentic about it, then those that you lose will be more than offset by those that you gain. And one last thing, don't do it to posture. I mean, that's the worst thing, and we see it too often. It's like you have FOMO that you aren't, taking a swing at the plate, and that's not where this should come from. This should come from the heart. This should come from a true need to speak values. And I think what you said, John, is so important. It shouldn't be political. It should be values based.
Yep.
So another question is, from consumers. Have you gotten any consumer pushback that you've had to address from some of your conversations that you've been having?
I would say not as much at Once Upon a Farm as I did at Annie's. I think it's primarily a factor of Annie's just being a lot bigger business. And but at Annie's, we definitely got pushback for positions that I was taking that were aligned with the company's values. And again, to your point, for every one of those, there was multiple people who were on the other side of that and saying, thanks for speaking up. I'm going to tell 3 of my friends about it. And so I think it overall worked to our benefit, but we live in a time where, like you said, it's a very polarized world, but we also live in a time where consumers' expectations of leaders to be authentic and to take positions on tough issues in society has never been higher. There's a global PR firm named Edelman, who you can Google this, but they've done a bunch of research on this, and a significant majority of consumers want to know what a company stands for and want to know what the CEO thinks of issues that are facing society relevant to the brand. And so, whereas 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was okay, and it was perceived as okay for CEOs to be quiet and to never try to stir the water no matter what on any issue. And that basically was the way most big companies operated. That is not the case anymore. And for example, take a look at General Mills and Jeff Harmony, who's an amazing big CPG leader over there, just came out with a really strong platform on systemic racism and anti-racism, stuff that a big company like that probably never would have done, probably 5 years ago, for sure 10 years ago. And there's no question they're going to take a lot of heat for that. But I know Jeff, and I know exactly that comes right from his heart. It's not political. It's like, that's the way the guy feels, and that's the way the vast majority of his employees feel. And so they're willing to take the hits if they come for that. They know they're on the right. They know they're on the right side of history.
And I think it's important to call out. It's scary to do it. It is frightening. I mean, I'll tell everyone listening personally that I spent a lot of my career fearful of being too strong in my opinions. I spent quite a bit of my career, almost 20 years of it, working for a company that was very conservative, and I was somewhat of the outlier in many ways, more than just some of my values and beliefs. And I kept those internal, and I just think that doesn't benefit anybody. And again, there's a way to approach it that is not antagonistic. It's actually inviting dialogue. And I've learned to have that conversation, learn to accept the blowback, but I invite the conversation because, as I mentioned earlier, I have an opinion. There's no question I have opinions, but I hold it loosely enough that I'm comfortable to listen to what somebody else has to say. And if I find that what they have to say is compelling and fact-based and makes me reevaluate my opinion, I'm cool with that. We have a question here from Adam Bent. Adam, good to hear from you, buddy. And this is a long one, so forgive me for reading, but Canadians like to write long questions. Do you think you would have changed your communication style and been less of an activist if you were at an earlier stage in your company with less resources? Continuing on, being early stage is precarious. You have to be careful to not ruffle too many feathers that may scare away investors or other stakeholders in the natural products industry. We are a challenger brand against the status quo in the seafood industry, which is riddled with human rights and environmental abuses. But we are being very careful how we talk about that as part of our brand story until we are larger and it feels safer to share these messages that challenge the larger brands in our space.
It's a great question. I'm not sure that I would have approached my communication style any differently. I hear where you're coming from with that, with respect to not wanting to ruffle the feathers of the big players in this space. I would suggest, though, maybe you're missing an opportunity, because the fact that there's a counter narrative to the conventional we're okay with it the way this industry operates is something that probably a lot of consumers would be interested in hearing. It might actually help you. I know, I've talked to many buyers in many different categories at retailers, and I can't really ever think of one time I heard somebody say, yeah, I didn't bring that brand in because they had strong opinions on something that's values driven. Mainly what they care about is the brand connecting with a core set of consumers that they want to have in their store and that they want to serve. And if your strong opinion and message on, improving the health and safety and just human condition of that industry is something that you think consumers would gravitate to, that's probably a really great thing to wrap your brand around and talk a lot about. That's the way I would see it. So hopefully that
helps. Adam, and I'll add my 2 cents for what it's worth. I think you're in the perfect position to have that conversation. I think you'll regret not doing it sooner rather than later. And I think both consumers and buyers want to hear from their brands. I mean, more so now than ever, and this is anecdotal, I don't have data sitting in front of me to back up what I'm about to say, but more so than ever, I believe consumers are making emotional choices with their brands. I mean, the brands it's emotive anyways, but they want brands to stand up for the things that they believe in. They want brands that represent the values and the good things in the world. And you have an opportunity to do that. Will you potentially alienate some people? Yes. And I mean, I'll only disagree with John slightly in the fact that I have seen buyers or other people say no to brands because they've been vocal about values. But those tend to be values that are less aligned with the ones that we're espousing, right? So they tend to be those that, in my opinion, are more arcane and outdated or closed-minded. But those that are open, especially in the natural products industry, I think it can be there. And to my earlier statement, the best marketing is polarizing. And if you put a stake in the ground and say that your brand, stands for all of these things, not just the sustainability of the way you are harvesting your product, but the way you're treating your people and the way you're treating your supply chain and the way you show up in the world, I would go in and go hard. And I think what will happen is, and last thing, I'm going longer than I planned here, but last thing about that is that if you do that now, the people that come around you are going to be the people who are aligned with you. If you don't do that, if you hold that back, what you might find is that you have investors and others who as you begin to vocalize that, aren't as aligned as you hope they would be, and aren't with you to have this conversation. So you have the opportunity to shape it now when you're earlier. So I'd go all in. So great question.
I agree. Good question.
Another question here is just regarding overall the conversation around race and we had a really interesting conversation with Laura Dickinson of the Jedi Collaborative around this already once. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, I would urge you to do it. But there are a lot of people who, and this question basically is, a lot of people are putting Black Lives Matter, things like that. We just don't know how to show up at this time. What do we do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a difficult time, and figuring out how to get your communication right around it to reflect what you really do believe, and to be an ally in change is important. I have a couple suggestions. First of all, there's a lot of resources and people you can talk to out there. You can have an open conversation with about how you should show up, and I think that's important. But I think the most important thing is to actually do something. I'm a big fan of social activism and in online communities and blackout days and things like that. I think that's fine because it's a signal of support. But to me, the most important thing is you actually do something and take some action. At O-Farm, what we just did is announced an Entrepreneur Ally program, which is a new thing that we created, where we basically took the opportunity to reach out to 3 really, really great Black entrepreneurs and company owners who have great brands that we think can be way bigger, and said, hey, how about we are your formal allies now, just like allies in wartime. And that means, what do you do? And if you have an ally in wartime, you ask for their help. You can count on them to be there. And so what we're going to do with these companies is allow our people and encourage our people, which won't be hard because everyone in our company wants to be actively involved, to help them with all the issues and business problems that come with scaling a business. And it'll be a really cool program. We'll see how it evolves. But that's just doing something, rather than don't let perfect get in the way of good. Just take action. Even if it's small, just do something. Show up. Let your people go to a rally. Just take action and be there. It really is a monumental time in our nation's history, and you want to be an ally and on the right side of history and encourage the movement to continue in a productive way that gives the same opportunity to everyone in our country. And Black Lives Matter, and people who say all lives matter, okay, but all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. So let's just take care of that one, okay? We got a lot of work to do in that area, and I think that's a really important movement that everybody should be involved in some way. Companies individually. I think it's a seminal movement.
I'm going to push everyone a little bit harder. I think doing some of the things on social media, like blackout, all of that is the easy way out. And I would encourage all of us to force ourselves maybe to be vulnerable and have some of the uncomfortable conversations. I've been trying to do that, just having conversations with some of my Black friends about what this means to them, what's going on. And, as a middle-aged white dude, I try to muster as much empathy as I can, and maybe I can grab a little bit from anti-Semitism, whatever, but I don't have any real understanding of it. But having that conversation, talking about what's going through, and how can I get involved, and what would be meaningful for you, and how can my business get involved, and what would be meaningful for you and for the movement is I think the better way to do it. And it's certainly, again, it's less comfortable, and you're going to have conversations and maybe find yourself doing things that you haven't done before. But that's cool, and quite frankly, that's how change happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any problem with the social stuff, but if that's where you stop, I agree. Like you're taking the easy road. Like that stuff's easy to do. Just get involved, take some action, do something tangible, try to change the hiring makeup of your company. You know, there's a million things you can do. And I agree, talking to folks in the community and getting their perspective on it is a super important way, because with the privilege that, you know, I grew up in, you know, there's no way I really understand, even though I can read and I can listen. It's not my lived experience. So I have to talk to people who have it and empathize with them and learn from them in that context.
Yeah. And even then, it's still just a fraction of understanding, right? It's just a kernel of insight because we haven't lived
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's okay. It's not something we should be ashamed of either. We've you know, there's nothing wrong with admitting the fact that we've been privileged not to have to do that. But where I think it's wrong is to stop there and just to hide in that privilege and do nothing, or use the label of being privileged to avoid having the conversation. But you know, here's another one that is a question, and this one's more about climate and climate change. So there's a lot of climate change deniers, and there's a lot of backlash right now about some of the business costs that are coming around that. But you know, it's an imperative, and climate change is real. And what advice would you give me? And this was an anonymous question. What advice would you give me towards starting that conversation and speaking out?
Well, in the industry, there's a lot of places to get involved. The Climate Collaborative is one of them, but you know, I think every business needs to have a point of view on what their own business practices are doing to contribute to being a solution to that problem. And your consumers are going to expect that you have a position on it and that you're actually actively doing things and working hard in that regard. To me, it's just like it's like anything. There's a lot of science deniers across the spectrum right now. And, you know, it's one thing to be a science denier on the issue of climate change 20 years ago. I mean, even then you could arguably say that was outlandish, but the idea that you would take that position now with all of the data we have is crazy. And so stand up for it and adapt your business practices, try to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, and I, you know, want to just echo the point around Climate Collaborative, and to go back to the prior one, the Jedi Collaborative. I mean, one of the great benefits, great fortunes of working in the natural product space is that, you know, as an industry, we show up in general, and I'm proud because I think we're showing up more than we ever have. So there's resources out there. You do not have to fight any of these battles on your own. And I would encourage you to investigate those and talk to the people and look at the materials and look at those kind of things, because you'll educate yourself along the way, and you'll also lend your voice to a larger chorus, and that can affect change as well. So here's one that's a little bit off of from what we've been talking about. But as you look back through your career as a leader, what have been some of your greatest lessons that you'd want leaders of today, entrepreneurs of today, to know? That's a great question, John.
Boy, I've learned a lot of lessons because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had a long career, and I've tried a lot of things and made a lot of mistakes. I would say, like at the highest level, it would be something related to what we've been talking about, which is, you know, think about your core values as a person, as a leader, the core values of the company that you're running or that you founded, and how can you drive the business to forward those values and to bring and help make the world a better place. Like that to me, the concept of purpose-driven business is so powerful. And it's not the only solution to our world's problems. Obviously, government's a big one, but the private sector and purpose-driven businesses, I think, are a key to a better world for all of us, and we're all in a position to do it. So I think the power of that, really understanding the power of that and harnessing that for your own personal brand and your business brand and success is probably one of the biggest lessons and things I've learned the power of over time. And the second, which is probably equally important, is hire the right people at the right time for your business. And what that generally means is hire people for where you want to go, not where you are. And that's the second biggest lesson I've learned over time is people are obviously everything, and you can get a lot of work done in your company and you can set a vision and all that stuff. But unless the companies that have great people and great cultures are the ones that usually are going to win, even if their product's not as good. And I'd take a great team and culture over a best product every day, because our team would probably win. And so I've learned that too.
Yeah, great point. So I'll go back to your purpose-driven and the impact that commerce in general can have. I mean, I always laugh at this, 35 plus years ago, when I remember when I was just newly dating my then girlfriend, now wife of 30 plus years, my in-laws were fearful of me, maybe justifiably so, but I was really the antithesis of what they thought their daughter would wind up with, because I was a business guy and they were in healthcare and academics. And my conversation with them has always been that yeah, I'm a business person, but I think you can do a lot of good through commerce. And that belief, that thesis stands as strong today, maybe even stronger. That a good economic model that is also a good conduit for change and for betterment is going to be the most powerful force.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
Money follows.
I agree. Yeah, let me just add a thought to that. And lots of times, entrepreneurs, people starting early stage companies will come up to me and they'll say, like, hey, I've got this initiative that I really care about. It's linked to the brand. And this is, my business model can drive this kind of change, but I feel bad because that change is so small right now, because my business is so small and the impact I'm driving is, but therefore small. And I always tell them, that's never a reason to be, to not feel good about what you're doing, because small things grow. A great example of that is, at Annie's, I remember when we were really moving the whole business hard toward organic in the early 2000s, and there was a point at which we came across a really small wheat farm, and we were trying to get this wheat farm to grow basically organic regeneratively, and it was just a shit show. It was like complicated. It was small. It was like we worked really, really, really hard on it, and it just felt like it wasn't a lot of impact. But it became a really important thing for us, and as we grew, it became bigger. And then, many years later, we were acquired by General Mills, and then we helped, forward that thinking inside that organization. And then 2 years later, they announced that they're going to do that on 1 million acres, and largely to support, the ecosystem and the supply requirements of the brand that they bought. Like, that's pretty amazing. And so small, acorns grow into oak trees, so
Yeah.
like, plant big ideas and always don't let that hold you back.
Yeah, and it's so true in this industry. That's a great story. We can push and point to a bunch more. So Jamie has a really interesting question, and this one's, I get this one. It's tough, and she says, a founder of a small business, small company, as I begin to grow, I'm confronted all the time with things that I find are, I'll change the word here, just anti my values, that don't fly in the face of my values, and I'm having to make decisions to say yes to deals and yes to things that I don't think are right. How do I deal with that?
It's a little hard without knowing the specifics of exactly what each decision they're having to ask or do is about. But I would say this industry is changing, and it's changing a lot. And but big industries change slow. The way they do business changes slow. The business practices change slowly. Um, there's a degree to which you kind of have to play the game a bit. Somebody asked me one time what it felt like to grow Annie's, from a small business to a medium-sized business, and I told him it was like going through a spanking machine. Like, you have to get set up at UNFI, and you have to deal with the deductions, and you have to do like all the stuff that are pain points for small entrepreneurs are things that many have gone through before, but persist and try to change the model in ways that you can still succeed with your business without compromising whatever value that is. But just know that I always say, like, don't let perfect get in the way of good, right? You can have such strong values that nothing ever happens, or you can hold your values and persevere and build. And sometimes, you'll have to carve a corner and agree to something that maybe from a business practice standpoint, I'm not talking about unethical stuff. I'm talking about like signing off on, a slotting bill or something that you don't think was right because of whatever the situation, but you might just have to do it to just move the business forward. And that's about the best answer I can give with that level of specificity.
Yeah. I'll just add to that a couple of things. One is I like the idea of kind of in the analogy of building kind of value guardrails, right? So you're going to scrape up against your guardrails. You have to. It's a business of trade-offs, and sometimes you have to understand, is this worth the trade-off for the outcome? Do I have can I affect more change if I accept this? And I'll give you a concrete example. So, I've talked to a few brands that have decided, that really wanted to do all compostable packaging, right? Because that was part of their core belief. They're regeneratively grown products. They're, really doing so many other things well and are bringing, really good, healthy, clean ingredient food to consumers. And they wanted that packaging. But the packaging was expensive, and the packaging at the time also didn't, extend the shelf life. And so what would have happened is that by doing that, just, which was definitely part of their core values of sustainability and fighting for what's right in the environment, they would have limited their ability to get everything else they've created into the hands and mouths of their consumers. And so it was a necessary trade-off. But it's not a necessary trade-off where you just throw up the white flag and say, I give up on it. They're continuing to advocate and work with suppliers to try to find a packaging solution that meets both the shelf life requirements and the cost requirements. And it's their commitment that when they do, that they will bring that forward. So I think that's the kind of mindset I would encourage all founders to have, is don't fall on the sword of absolute. There are certain values or certain elements of your values that should be absolute, and there are others that are relative. And you have to have some ability to understand and look forward and say, this is a relative value. I'm going to come back to it. I'm not giving it up. I'm not putting it on the shelf. I'm not, phoning it in. But I know that if I, throw myself on the sword at this moment in time, I go nowhere and have no impact. And that's really hard. That's a hard business lesson to do. A lot of us, go home and feel like you got to shower to get the slime off you when you make those decisions. But, you got to live to fight another day. And if that's what you're thinking about doing, but to John's point, having a firm absolute, like, I'm not going to engage in anything unethical. I'm not going to, do anything that promotes things that are just absolutely antithetical to what I believe in, but there are relative values within.
Yep.
We have a few minutes left, and so I'll continue with these questions around speaking up, but I also do want to give all of you an opportunity to throw a question in that maybe isn't germane to this particular topic, but maybe just, to pull from John's wisdom. It's a rare opportunity to have a tribal elder, sorry, John, truth hurts, dude, in our midst. So feel free, and I'll try to get to those as well. Here's another question, and it's another one, anonymous. So by the way, there's a fair amount of you who are chicken shit today, so shame on you given this conversation. I'm only kidding. The question really is, when my co-founder and I disagree about a particular value that I feel strong about and want to speak out about, and she doesn't want me to talk about, any advice there?
Yeah, you broke up kind of in the middle of the question, but I think I got it. Basically, two co-founders, one wants to speak up, one doesn't, and how do they rectify that?
You got it.
Yeah. Well, I think if it's speaking for the brand and like this is going to be like a formal statement that you're going to staple onto the forehead of the brand, I think it's really important that you're together on it. And because I think if you're not, I think it can end up backfiring on you later. But if you're just one of the co-founders speaking individually about the things that you care about, there should be no hold barred. You should be able to do that, and I would encourage you to do that. So that's the best advice I could give there.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly, I would give the same advice, not that you asked, anonymous, not that you asked me, but I first of all, have the conversation, tell your co-founder why you feel it's important. And if you're not unified, then don't speak as a brand, speak as a person, but let your co-founder know that that's what you're going to do, and that you're not going to speak as the brand, but you're going to speak as a person. So, because that also gives them the opportunity to rethink that. And I would also encourage everyone to have conversations like this with your co-founders or with your team or your investors sooner rather than later, and lay out some of those core beliefs. I think a mistake, and John, I'd love you to weigh in on this, but I think a mistake that a lot of early stage companies make is they wait too long to start thinking about their values and the culture they want to create. And then suddenly, because they're heads down. They're just trying to get, their velocity to grow, and they're trying to win their next investment round. They're not really having the dialogue about, what is the culture? What is this play? What is this brand going to be, and what's it going to be like to work here, and what do we stand for? Not having that conversation sometimes means the horse gets out of the barn, and then suddenly you are strapped to a culture that you had no intent of building, and you have to figure it out and walk it back. You agree with that, and any advice there?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Like, that is absolutely true. And I've written about it and talked about it a lot, but the first 7-8 years I was at Annie's, we hadn't really spent a lot of time articulating culture, articulating core values. And as a result, I think there was a lot of opportunity that we probably missed, and risks that we took in the business. Once we did that, by the way, and locked that down, and like you said, like what are the guardrails on that windy road, and that we're not going to compromise on, the business just took off. And we started talking about those values to our consumers. They loved it. The day I decided to come over to O-Farm, I got together with the 3 other co-founders, and we wrote them all down. We got it from day one. I think it is the most important thing, one of the most important things to do early. And it's actually much easier to do early because it's you and your co-founders writing what you want this company to be. It's your creation. You should set the culture and not let it just evolve without intention. It gets a lot harder to do that later, to your point, if you're trying to correct a culture that's developed without intention.
And a couple of things. One, just to add there, is that one of the things that a lot of larger companies buy with a brand is the culture, and we see the culture often fall apart after that. But culture is something that is it adds value to an organization. A good, vibrant, healthy culture does that. But I'm a big fan of using these to be actionable, John. So specifically, if I am an early stage brand and I'm now thinking about what we just said, any tips in terms of how I turn that into action? What process would you recommend to have this conversation to begin to kind of codify what those values are?
Well, the beauty is there's so many examples. You can just literally look around at companies that you admire, look at how they've articulated their culture, their core values, their intent. And so there's a lot of models you can look to. And then what I've found a good process to do is to really get the founder group or whoever you want to be involved in that setting, culture setting, and really just get off site for a day or two and just talk about it and go like, hey, what are the three, it can be as simple as just asking some big high level questions and then talking for a few hours about it. Like, what are the three most important things that we want this business to stand for? What are the things we want the work environment to be like? And you start writing that stuff down on big sheets of white paper, and then you can just bring it all together in like a crisp mission statement, a vision, set of core values. And then I'd lastly say there's tons of really experienced people out there that have seen lots of early stage companies and that can help you too, that can help guide you through a process to get that feedback too. So like almost bringing an outside moderator in to help the team develop it, somebody like you and others that have done this before. That's also very helpful.
I'll give you that $5 for the plug later. Yeah, I mean, just have a damn conversation and write it down. I mean, you can formalize it as much as you want. There's some great books. There's some really good resources. If anyone wants to ping me, I'll suggest a few, but you don't have to overcomplicate it. I mean, if you just take a piece of paper out and say, what do we stand for? I use a very simple thing which is just a sheet that says, here's our purpose, here's our vision, here's our core values, and here are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and aligning on those. And a mistake that I see so often is that people start getting too wordy about this. They start making it fluffy. This is not something that has to be very long, very detailed. It just has to be core, and it should be something that you just immediately grab from top of mind and be able to say, this is our purpose, this is our vision, and these are the things we really stand for. So, and I would encourage everyone to work on that. Jeremy has a question for us. Nice to have you here, man. Why do you believe many founders are hesitant to speak out or take a public stance against systematic racism?
It's a great question, and I think it's, as we've alluded to earlier, it's been a very sensitive topic, and I think a lot of folks don't know how to start the conversation, and I'd say that explains why it hasn't happened up to this point. I will then pivot over to, you have to speak up now. Like, there is absolutely no reason to not be an actively involved ally in trying to solve this problem, this 400 plus year old problem here on this continent. And I don't really think there are any excuses now. Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that you shouldn't get involved. Just know that your employees, this matters to your employees, it matters to your consumers, it matters to all your business partners. Many people have trouble articulating that or are afraid to, but just know that they do, and be part of the solution now. There's just this is one of those things where there's a side of right and a side of wrong, and you have to, it's not okay, in my opinion, to just be on the side of right and quiet. You need to be on the side of right and active and an ally and making a change to make it better, because that's the only way it's going to get better, and that we're going to continue the momentum that has started through these recent months of tragedy that are at least bringing the hope of a broad awakening that can drive the systemic change that can make this country fair, and to give everybody an equal shot and to live up the values that we were all taught this country had, but that haven't been evident in the way that it's manifested through society. So So I don't think there are any excuses in this area anymore. You have to go. You have to be active.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the only thing I'll add is that, you know, my belief again, and no data to back it up. It's perception. You know, I think fear and vulnerability and all of that enter into it. But sadly, and this may not be a popular thing to say, I also feel like ignorance does. And I think there is unfortunately enough of us out there who don't really understand that there is systematic racism, that they don't really get it, and they're not having that conversation. So, you know, educate yourself, take the time to learn. And John, I'm going to return this favor in just a moment, because I want to give you, I'm right now working feverishly on building the virtual soapbox that you're going to be able to stand on here to take us home in a second. But I'm going to stand on mine for just a moment and talk about that word ignorance. I really feel that deep down, that's one of the fundamental challenges we're having as a society right now, is that we have just a pandemic of ignorance, that we're not, as a society, taking the time to educate our people, ourselves, and really leaning into critical thinking. We have so much confirmational bias out there that we're letting others do that thinking for us. So if you're not speaking up against systematic racism, if you don't feel like you have a voice in that, it could be because you just honestly don't understand it as well as you should. And I will tell you again, being completely transparent, I've been working on educating myself more. I feel I'm a fairly self-aware and have been, you know, somebody who has been willing to have these conversations for a long, long time. But I will also admit that I still have a lot left to learn, and I'm trying to learn to understand better so that I can use my voice and my position to be a better agent of change. So I think it's fear, I think it's vulnerability, and sadly, I do think ignorance is, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense. It's just what the word means. It's just lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, ignorance. So
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to you. We got 4 or 5 minutes left. I'll deal with the remaining couple of questions. I feel like we've covered them later, and just let you kind of talk about, you know, what's top of mind. What are you thinking? What do we need to do? Galvanize us. There's a lot of listeners that will be listening to the podcast, and you know, we're sitting here having this conversation, worried about rolling blackouts, hoping we get this in during one of the worst heat waves on history, because there is no climate change.
Yeah.
And there is no global warming. So
Exactly.
all yours, man. Take us home.
Okay, so I'm by nature an optimist, and I've always looked at a glass and looked at the half full part. That doesn't mean that I haven't recognized the half empty part and been driven by it. But I think this industry is uniquely positioned, as we've talked a little bit before, on as being values driven, and as a result, we've attracted thousands and thousands and thousands of people who really care about making the world a better place for their kids. And I have 4 kids, 27, 25, 20, and 14. And I look at them and I look at the way that they respond to diversity, the way that they're empathetic, the way that their generation is just in many ways better enabled to drive the positive change that we want than maybe my generation, the generation before me. And but we've got to stand up for them and collectively don't be shy about driving your voice and your audience to drive the positive change that we want in the world. Our kids need us too. The problems that we have are big. The opportunity for change from this industry to drive better outcomes for the environment, for better outcomes for health, for better access to food for everyone is just massive. And get involved. And the last one thing, I want to just go back real quickly for 1 second and tell you one fact on SNAP that you didn't know. And I want to ask all of you to advocate for SNAP in your communities and in whatever political process you're involved in. If you think of every meal that every food bank in the United States gives and develops, and think of the hundreds of thousands of people at food banks, SNAP delivers 9 for that one. And that one program, it has more to do with keeping people fed in this country in this adversity than anything, and it needs all of us to stand up for it. So I just leave that one last ask. Take the opportunity to do that. I think we'll all benefit from that. But anyway, just enjoy the growth of your business. I think the outlook for this industry is unbelievable. There's nothing about COVID or this recession that we're going through that's changed that. If anything, it's doubled down the impact and the opportunity for healthfulness and the growth of this industry. We have a lot to work through, but we have a lot to be optimistic about. And I really just thank you for the opportunity to share today. So thank you, Elliot, for having me.
John, can't thank you enough for doing this. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you speaking up and being a leader in that and helping show all of us how we can stand up and do it. And my kids are similar ages, 27, 25, 21. We have a grandbaby, and I'm a big believer that out of the greatest periods of disruption come the biggest change. And that's how I put my head down on the pillow at night, because God knows we're in a period of disruption. I think officially 2020 is a 4-letter word. So I appreciate you being here very much, taking the time out of your schedule.
Thank you. Peace, everybody.